and welcome. This is a session on why you should publish your research and how to do it. And I want to point out that this session is being recorded. So next slide, please.
Hopefully it is. There it is. Okay.
All right. Yeah. So as I mentioned, I'm Thomas Brown. We're also joined by Allegra Swift, the scholarly communications librarian, and by some of the editors from the Challenger Research Journal. So you'll hear from all of us today, and I'll start by talking about why it's important to publish your research. All right. So why should you publish? I'm going to minimize this window over here. There we go. Why should you publish your research? Well, first of all, it's a great way. It's the best way of letting other people know about the work you've done. So I think everyone in this meeting is doing research right now, and publishing your research is a good way to let people know what you're doing. It's actually the way that you can. It's the product of your research, and tells people what you've done, what you've learned. And it's great to do the research and learn things on your own, but this is the way to put that knowledge out there to the community. And it's a way of building on scientific knowledge. So some people liken research in science to putting bricks in the edifice of knowledge in a particular field. And if you are someone who is doing research, you know that in order to really make a meaningful research project, you have to know what research has been done in that area. And how do you know what research has been done? You go to the publications in that area. When you publish your research and you've gone through and had your research paper reviewed by your peers, and they've said, this is good, they put their stamp of approval on it, and your research is published, then that is a way to become a recognized expert in your field. So another reason to publish is to advance your career. In many cases, so some of you may be thinking that eventually you will go into careers in research, and I'm hoping that it is the case for many of the McNair scholars who are here in the meeting. But one way that you can show that you're making advances in your field is to publish. And in fact, as a professor or as somebody who's a researcher, that is the best way to show what you've done in your career. And it's a way of kind of putting flags or planting a flagpole in the area where you're doing your research, and it's a way of being recognized for that research. So it can also get you funding for further research. When you apply for funding and you're doing your research, you have this great idea for doing research and you want to get funded for it, you will be submitting proposals for that funding. And when you can say that you've published in that area already and you've done good research, then you can cite that research in your proposal, and you can say, look, I've got credibility, I know what I'm doing, and I can publish good work in this area, and that can help you secure funding for further research. All right, next slide, please. So you may have noticed when you were, if you're reading research papers for your research project, that many times, in fact, probably more often than not, depending on what field you're in, the papers you're reading have more than one author. And you might wonder, well, why is it that there is more than one author, and how do they contribute to this, and what is the meaning of having someone listed first versus someone listed second, third, or fourth, or last? So in order to be listed as an author on a publication, when you submit your paper to the journal, you have to tell them who the different authors are and what their kind of relative contributions are. So when you see a paper that's got multiple authors on it, the first author is the person who is recognized as contributing most to that work. And in order to be listed as an author at all, and I'm going to be reading from, this is a online page about authorship, and this is from the National Center for Biotechnology Information. And they're saying that each author should have participated sufficiently in the work to take responsibility for the content. So authorship credit should be based only on substantial contributions to A, conception and design of the project, or analysis and interpretation of data, and to the drafting of the article or revising it critically for important intellectual content, and on final revision of the version to be published. So the first author is generally recognized as the person who has contributed most to the writing of the article. So you also oftentimes will have second and third authors, and the order in which those authors are listed in the paper will be the order of how much they've contributed to the paper. And when you submit your article for publication, you need to say what the contributions of each of those authors is. So, and there's also someone who's called the last author, oftentimes, and it's not always the case, but sometimes that person who's listed last as the author is the person who is really the senior author, and the person who is who oftentimes is the person who runs the research group. So that would be the PI in the research group you're working in, or the person who has probably come up with most of the research project ideas in the research group. Not always, but sometimes the first author is the one who usually is spearheading that project. But oftentimes that last author is the person who runs the lab and who is really the person who's generating the funding for the lab, and is also largely responsible for most of the research projects that are going on in the group. So if you're starting out in research, you're just beginning your research career, it's great to be recognized as the first author. You're probably not going to be the last author on a paper, but if you can be the first author, that gives you a lot of credibility, and it kind of gives you more points, sort of as a researcher, in terms of how much credibility you have, and how much kind of weight your work on that paper carries. So you can also when you submit your article for publication, you have not only the authors, but you can also have acknowledgements in the paper. And sometimes the acknowledgements will have to do with someone who's contributed to the project but hasn't contributed to the writing of the research paper, or to editing, or analyzing data. And sometimes that might be somebody who would be in a scientific lab, might be a lab tech who's really helped a lot with running some of the experiments, for example. So that's also a way to be acknowledged in a paper without being an author. All right, next slide, please. All right, and so when you're going to be submitting your paper for publication, you might wonder, well, where should I submit my paper? There are so many journals out there. I mean, I think Allegra could probably tell us, but I'm thinking there must be tens of thousands of journals, of scholarly peer-reviewed journals that you can find at the library. So where you might want to start is to consider journals that specialize in your area of study. And so there are journals in so many different areas. So for example, there are journals that specialize in the area of addiction treatment. There are journals that specialize in fields like sociology or neuroscience, and so on. And you're going to be, when you're doing your research, you're probably going to be responding to research that's been done previously. So your research is going to be hopefully building on previous research that's been done. And you can also look to see where research that has been done previously has been published. So if the research that's been published previously was in, say, neuroscience, or in Cell, or some particular journal, you might want to also try to publish your research in that journal, especially if it directly addresses previous publications. Another consideration for where you might want to submit your paper is you might want to consider submitting your journal to the journal that has the highest impact factor. The impact factor is a number that represents the average number of citations that articles published in that journal in the last few years have received. So this is something that it goes back for 2 years before the current year. So if we're looking for the impact factor for the journal for 2022, we would look at the number of citations that articles that were published in 2020 and 2021 received. And then you divide that number of citations by the number of articles that were published in the journal, number of citable articles. So journals with a higher number have a higher impact factor, are the ones that have been cited the most, which also means that they're probably the ones that have been read the most. And so they have the highest impact because more people are reading these articles. And if people are citing the articles, that means that they're building upon knowledge that was put in the journal previously. So that's why that's called an impact factor, because it really is those articles are having the greatest impact because they're affecting current research the most. Another way to figure out where to submit your paper is simply to ask your mentor, and they'll have a pretty good sense of the impact factor, but you can also look up the impact factor. You can do a web search for the journal and you can ask what the impact factor is, and you can compare different journals that way. But your mentor also might know that there's a particular journal that would specialize in the topic that you're researching and that you're writing about. All right, next slide, please. So then once you've got your manuscript and you're ready to submit it and you know where to submit it to, what do you do? Well, you submit it to the editor-in-chief of the journal, and the editor-in-chief is, or the person who receives it, the editor of the journal who receives that article, gets to decide whether or not it is going to be reviewed by reviewers for the journal. So they might say, well, yeah, this is in the right area. They might not even look at the article a whole lot, but just to determine whether or not your journal is, or your article is on a topic that is suitable for the journal, and also if it seems to fit the requirements for the journal in terms of word length and type of article, whether it's an original research article or not, and so on. So they determine if it's a suitable article for the journal, and if they think it is, then what they'll do is they'll send it on to the reviewers. And reviewers are going to be people who are experts in the field. Oftentimes those reviewers are, I think more often than not, the reviewers are going to be anonymous. That is, the author of the paper, the manuscript, will not know who the reviewers are, but they're going to be people who have published extensively or recognized as experts in the field in one way or another. So and usually there are going to be 2 or 3 reviewers for a paper, and each of those reviewers is going to read the paper and they will comment on it, and they'll make recommendations on the article. So the reviewer, each reviewer is going to take the article, read it, and critically comment on. They might make specific comments about particular things that you say in the article. They might take issue with it. They might say, well, why don't you consider this? And, how come you didn't incorporate this other research paper that's not in here? Or they might say, this is fantastic. It looks like they've really covered everything. I have very few comments. But what they'll do then is they'll submit their comments. They've got 2 sets of comments. One is comments to the editor, where they're saying, this article is, the editor will ask them to say whether they think the article should be accepted for publication, or whether it has it needs to be revised, and how serious or how extensive the revisions need to be. So the reviewer tells the editor that, and they also tell the editor anything that they might not want to say directly to the author or authors of the paper that would be confidential and simply to the editor. So you might say that this is a really significant contribution to the field, or it really doesn't build on previous research very much. It's, we might want to publish it, but they've got to do some revisions. So they have to give their review, and they also give those comments to they give their own set of comments to the authors, and they will sometimes be very meticulous in terms of addressing particular things on each page. And so then the decision is made by the editor to either accept the paper as is, if both reviewers agree that it can be accepted as is, which is next slide, please, which is the best thing possible, of course, because you don't want to have to make revisions. But most likely, you're going to have to, if your paper is going to be published in that journal, you're going to have to make revisions. It is also possible, of course, that they'll say, no, simply this article isn't really up to snuff. It's not appropriate for this journal. It's not rigorous enough research, or the methods of data analysis just aren't rigorous enough, or for whatever reason they might want to just reject it outright. And then at that point you can say, well, I'll submit my article somewhere else. They can also, though, say that we're going to suggest revisions, and then you can resubmit after you've made those revisions. Then those usually will fall into two categories, either minor revisions or major revisions. And minor revisions might be things like adding something to the analysis, or considering another article in your paper. Or major revisions might be completely reworking the analysis, or something of that nature. So as the author, then you would get this reply, and they would say, well, you've got to make minor revisions, and then you can resubmit. And if that's the case, or if there are major revisions, you have to then address everything that the reviewers have said. So if you've got two reviewers, you've got to reply directly to both of those reviewers and say, well, here's how we're addressing what you've said in your comments. And you have to be meticulous and really address everything they say. Then you resubmit, and then hopefully they'll say, you've done everything we've asked you to, and this is perfect. We're going to accept it. But they can also say, well, this is good, but we still want you to make revisions. So when you send it back in, those same reviewers are going to look at the revised manuscript, and they'll again comment. They'll make their comments to the editor-in-chief, and they'll send their comments to you. Again, hopefully your manuscript is accepted, but sometimes they'll say you need to make a little more, you need to make some more revisions, and then you have to go through the whole process again until you get the point of being accepted. So next slide, please. I think we're moving on to the next section of our seminar for the day.
Yeah, hello. So as Dr. Brown mentioned, I'm Allegra Swift, and I'm the Scholarly Communications Librarian. And my job is to provide services and resources to support scholars at UC San Diego from all backgrounds, all disciplines, and at all career stages in communicating their scholarship. So my job really is to help you and the other authors and creators make sure that however you communicate your research, by publishing in an academic journal, as Dr. Brown was talking about, or publishing a book, or publishing data sets, or a digital exhibit, or whatever the format is, that your scholarship reaches the widest possible audience, and that you're able to communicate your value and impact. So Dr. Brown talked about metrics like high impact factor journals. We do workshops on communicating impact and metrics, both your own, so the researcher metrics, as well as journal impact factor. We also do workshops on evaluating and finding journals. So all of these kinds of areas are within our wheelhouse. And why I'm here today is really to talk to you about one of these specific sections about publishing and options and support through the library. So I'm going to show you some examples of UC San Diego faculty, a postdoc, and a graduate student, and how they communicate their research. I'll show you some examples of undergraduate work and publishing options, and then there's some funding research resources for publishing in open access journals that you can access while you're here at UCSD. And then the last thing that I want to mention is that there's a few things to consider when publishing as an undergraduate that can often be overlooked. So I almost told myself next slide. Okay. These three scholars and researchers here are all communicate their research by publishing books or journal articles, but they also communicate their scholarship through other mediums. Dr. Alex Fattel is a tenure track faculty member in the communications department, and his work is really interdisciplinary and multi-format. So he writes books, he writes journal articles, and he also produces documentary films as his scholarly output. He gives TED Talks and other recorded lectures as a form of scholarly communication. As a new faculty, I work with Dr. Fattel to help him get more visibility for his publications by depositing them in the UC's open access repository for faculty and student research. That's eScholarship. So eScholarship is also the publisher platform for the Challenger, and which is the undergraduate open access journal that the student editors are going to talk about in a few minutes. And they'll talk more about eScholarship and how that platform interacts with their journal. So, but before I go on further, let me define open access, because this term is going to come up a lot, and it's really beneficial for you to know about. So open access is scholarship and research that's available to the world, unrestricted by financial, licensing, or technical obstacles. Many of the journal articles that you access through logging into the VPN are paid for by the library at huge sums. And once you graduate, you're going to lose access to these resources. But you can access open access publications without logging on and well after you graduate from any institution where you may land, or any job, or really anything. So the second person is a Scripps graduate student and PhD candidate in biological oceanography. This is Allison Cusick. She's a science communicator on social media, in addition to publishing journal articles and open access data. She's a huge supporter of undergraduate research and careers. And I interacted with her recently on Twitter, connecting her to the data curation program that we have here at the library, because she had expressed the need for curation and preservation, as well as publication of her open data. A lot of times, your grant funders are going to require that you provide open access to the publication coming out of that funding, as well as now they're asking for open data. I started following her on Instagram because she is so much fun to watch, as she brings the public into her research adventures in Antarctica. She's really a good one to watch, to learn about science and about science communication. Plus, she's hilarious, and she'll bring a spark of joy to your day. The third person is Dr. Caroline Collins, and she's my last but not least example, a postdoctoral fellow in communications department, where she also earned her PhD. Her public scholarship includes award-winning major grant-funded media and digital exhibits. In addition to publishing books and articles, her PhD dissertation and her MFA thesis are also on eScholarship and open access. And I recently worked with Dr. Collins to take advantage of the OA publishing support through the recent UC licensing agreements with publishers. And these agreements help authors affiliated with the UC, which includes all of you, to publish open access in journals by the major commercial publishers. So a lot of the journals that Dr. Brown was talking about. So you can find a list of these agreements, what the UC are calling transformative agreements or read and publish agreements, on the UC's Office of Scholarly Communications website. The intention behind these agreements is to allow reading access to all the journals published by a major publisher, as well as publishing access. So just about 50% of open access journals charge authors an article processing charge or an APC. And these charges can range from a couple of $100 to as much as $5,000. Nature, which is one of those journals that a lot of times your mentors will say you should be publishing in, or these are one of these important journals, recently instituted a $10,000 APC program. So the UC is negotiating lowering subscription costs, which are also skyrocketing, and a cap on these APCs. In addition, the UC libraries will pay the first $1,000 of a discounted APC where there are these agreements. And then if the author doesn't have any research funding to tap into, the UC will pay the remainder of the APC. So the library has also negotiated discounts on APC with other publishers. So I have a guide that's linked in these slides, and we can give you all access afterwards. So you can see from this list of these couple of lists if a journal falls under one of these UC or UCSD agreements. And keep in mind that once you graduate and are no longer at a UC, this funding support is no longer an option. So that's why that link to the Directory of Open Access Journals is a really good, useful tool. This is where a lot of the open access journals are registered, and they have metadata and information. You can actually even filter by whether an open access journal in your subject area charges an APC or not. And they're supposed to be really transparent and show the amounts there if they do charge. That's all I want to say about that. And yeah, and always come to me if you have any questions. So the last thing I'm going to talk about briefly is what you should think about before you publish. So copyright. People don't get a lot of education on copyright. This is like if you're using somebody else's images or text or video, any other kind of material that you're incorporating, do you have the right to do so? So I can help you learn about like whether or not you can use these things, whether you can apply what's called fair use, or finding open access licensed, Creative Commons licensed materials that allow you to just do whatever you want with a third party. I also, help with getting you to understand what kind of rights you hold as a creator or an author. It has been like current practice with many of the journal publishers to have you sign over your copyright so that you no longer have agency over your own writing. So like you'll see a lot of faculty don't actually realize this. They sign away their copyrights and then they'll post like the PDF, the publisher's PDF of their work on their website or on in their course materials, and they're actually infringing on the copyright of the publisher because they signed it all away. So we actually have some tools to where, teach you a little bit about how to retain your copyright, how you can negotiate retaining your copyright, how you can get it back. In addition, a lot of the open access journals, which is another kind of benefit, is they explicitly allow you to they don't take your copyright, they allow you to retain it, and then you can Creative Commons license your article. And this is the case with the Challenger, that they don't take your copyright, and I believe everything is Creative Commons licensed. Okay, and lastly, one of the other things that you should consider is thinking about if you're doing research where you have other collaborators, especially faculty, and this is kind of ongoing research. A lot of times, especially in STEM fields, I see where a student will, they'll publish their senior thesis or they'll publish an article on this kind of ongoing research, and they haven't really consulted with the faculty member or haven't really described where it's going, that this is going to be open access and openly available. And a lot of times faculty have concern about being scooped or being, having their research and publishing being preempted. So you really should have this. If what you're publishing on is ongoing research of someone else, you really should have that conversation with them. Is it okay if I put this stuff up? And the last thing to think about is privacy. So I've had students who are writing about maybe gender expression, included images of other students who may or may not want the world to read about them, but we're never really asked permission to share widely. I've also had students writing about, say like the government in their home country, and then they've expressed concern that their family is going to face repercussions. I mean, those are really kind of dramatic examples, but just always have that thought in your mind about like, is anonymity, or should things be shared, or not? And I gave that example of Allison Cusick, the graduate student I mentioned earlier, she really overshares in the name of science, but she is irreverent and she's funny, and she draws you in, which is why she does it. She does it with a purpose and with intention, and no harm done. The point of her kind of broadly sharing is to draw the people in, which is a method of communication. And it's especially what we need when we want the public to understand and engage with a topic in order to make positive change in society and the environment. So again, I and my fellow librarians are here to support your research and scholarship from the start to finish. So please feel free to contact me for help with anything I've covered here. I'll also give some guidance on publishing best practices for journal editors, as I do with a Challenger. That's another area of work that I do. And I'm just going to slide through this last slide because the Challenger editors are going to talk a lot about eScholarship, but I just want to mention that Dr. Brown and I are talking about plans to collect and provide open access to the Undergraduate Research Hub research under the academic units in UCSD's instance on eScholarship. And so this is where the Challenger is published. You'll find if you click on that little X on the Undergraduate Research Hub, it'll drop down, and the Challenger, you can find the Challenger papers there. So open access not only is a benefit to your research, it benefits you, but it also gives you that platform. And I'm going to take a snip from the Undergraduate Research Hub mission and vision. It gives you a platform to influence conditions in local, national, or global communities. And you can't really do that if it's behind a paywall and these communities can't access. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to our next speakers, the editors from the Undergraduate Research Journal, the Challenger.
All right, thank you. So hello, everyone. The Challenger is an undergraduate organization that aims to publish academic research papers of different disciplines. Our mission is to further the access and representation of underrepresented students by giving URH scholars at UC San Diego the opportunity to publish and share their research. We provide mentorship and educational workshops to help navigate and prepare students for their future endeavors. And we also provide a platform for students of all backgrounds to express their unique lens of viewing and addressing societal problems to bring positive impacts to the community.
Hi, so I'll talk a little bit about the submission. So now that you've been a little bit introduced to what publishing is, you're probably curious on how to actually publish with us. So if you could maybe please move to the next slide. Thank you. So in our process, we have 4 documents which will be required. One will obviously be like your paper, what you're trying to submit. And the other 3 documents we ask is the bio sketch. So that's just a little bit about yourself. So when we publish your paper, we can attach a little info about you so people know who wrote it. And that's also impactful, especially when topics are concerning to your own personal identity. Then it becomes more important, like why you wrote it, why it matters. And then we have our cover sheet, which is any like formatting type that you want to clarify with the actual submission. And then the faculty advisor consent. This is very important because every research will be at different levels of publication. Not all will be ready to publish, even if you're excited to publish and you want to publish. Maybe there's certain things in your lab that they're waiting for, like a bigger paper. Early in the chat, somebody had asked, can you publish in multiple journals? This becomes important here because say that your lab is now currently getting ready for a big publication in like one of the really big journals in your field. If you publish just your section within our journal, they might not be able to reuse all of that within their bigger paper. So there might be like questions and like confusions of like things that might arise. So it's very important before you decide that you want to publish that you talk to your PI, your like professor, whoever you're working with, to make sure that everybody's on the same page of like, we can publish this and this is okay to go into like a formal journal. And that's also why we asked you to get that consent form signed so that we know it was okayed. There's also more information, just like little bit details of each of these, which forms to submit, where to submit, and things like that. You can definitely check it out on our website. I'll put it in the chat. It also has like more bio about us and places for you to ask us questions. That's also where you'll find access to all the Google Forms to show your interest for publication. And then after you show your interest, then we'll add you to a Google Classroom where you'll submit these documents. And then the next slide, please. So just a little timeline of how the submission process will work. So this quarter, we have like officially started opening up submissions, and it'll stay open all the way until the start of next fall. So any research that you do over the summer, and once you work on your paper, I used to be a McNair Scholar, so I know like we all have that paper due at the end of the program. So if you feel ready to publish that, you're more than welcome to send it to submission. If you want to wait another year, however you want to be, that's fine as well. Once the submissions are accepted and finalized at the deadline, you'll get an email or a letter from us saying, are we accepting it or not? And then you'll be paired up with editors, undergrad and grad editors, depending on how it'll change based on each volume. You might get 2 or 3 or however many. And they will work with you to help like better your paper for publication standards. So even if you're worried at first, if your paper isn't like perfect, that's fine. We work with you to try to get it to like publication level. And once all those revisions are done, the final publication will be towards end of fall, early winter type. And then you'll be able to see your name on a publication, which is really cool. Yeah, and so check it out. Let me know if you have any questions as well.
Okay, after you've completed the forms and documents and went through the timeline, your papers will be published on eScholarship. So next slide will be the video, I think, what eScholarship website will look like. So just narrate instead of awkward silence. So you search Challenger on the general website, or you navigate to UC San Diego branch of the website, I guess, specifically. And then after that, you'll be able to find Challenger. And if you scroll down on the page, you'll see many, many papers. And if you click a specific paper, while the video is playing fast. And then if you scroll down more, you can see the actual content of the paper. And then there's a, I guess, navigator on the right-hand side. You can jump to different sections. Yeah, that's what the scholarship website will look like. And then go to the next slide. So eScholarship, that's the link there. You'll be able to access your paper there. Your paper will be published. Other people will be able to see it. And then on eScholarship, you will also be able to find papers from Google Scholar. And then I think people from using Google Scholar will also be able to search up your paper, which is on eScholarship. There is a lot of background noise. You can also find your paper on the journal website, which the link was pasted in the chat earlier. And then also there will be, of course, printed copies of your paper distributed around campus. One of the locations would be the library. The amount of copies would depend on funding. So right now we have like 1 or 2 copies. And then lastly, we'll also be publicizing your contribution to eScholarship through social media such as Facebook groups, Twitter, Instagram, as well as department newsletters. And then we also plan to reach out to external nonprofit organizations that align with our mission to publicize your paper. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to just jump in and add a few things to this, if you don't mind. So eScholarship is indexed by Google Scholar and Google. So that's one of the reasons like your papers will show up in Google Scholar, as well as there's an academic search engine called Base, which is really a cool search engine. But this is part of framing your scholarly identity. These things show up in Google Scholar. You can start a Google Scholar profile, as well as an ORCID, which is a researcher identification that a lot of journals and publishers are requiring. And there's a way of actually pulling in automatically, publications from journals, but also eScholarship. So I have an ORCID and I have it automatically ingesting my papers, and it creates kind of a CV on the fly, which is really useful to have an updating CV. So I just wanted to plug that in there. And I wanted to go back to a question that Valerie had at the beginning, and can an article only be published in one journal? Yes, as was answered, typically yes, but you can also deposit on preprint servers a lot of times. And according to the UC open access policies, you are allowed to put your postprint, which is the accepted version of a manuscript, into eScholarship. So, gaining open access, maybe you're publishing in a closed access journal or something like that, you can put it into eScholarship. All right, back to our program.
Yeah, thanks for adding, Allegra. So we're just kind of talk about reasons to choose to submit your paper to the Challenger. One is to get published on an open access platform, just like how everyone before me emphasis is very important to have your paper published on an open access platform. So in this case, it will be eScholarship. This means that your research information, your paper will be available to readers at no cost, and it will, just like how Cardiff and Allegra mentioned, it will show up on Google Scholars and other journal and search websites. So this will promote the readership of your articles. And just talk about so we started in 2019, and this year we are currently publishing our 3rd volume. But however, our first volume from not last year, but 2 years ago are still being read and bring positive impact to the community. Another reason to get published is to get cited. So far we have published a total of 6 papers for our first and second volume, and 3 out of 6 were cited, and we also got 1 Nature citation. So I'm happy to see that, and it just means that the papers are being read and are contributing to other people's research work and bring in positive impact. So getting published also means that you're getting familiar with the publication process. With us, we understand how our students have final submitters, so we kind of intentionally make our due dates, due date for first draft revision, second draft revision, roughly the time when it's manageable, and we give most of our authors at least 2 weeks. So usually it's 2 to 3 weeks for them to turn in their revised version. And typically we have 2 rounds of revision, and after those 2 rounds of revision, they go to a faculty advisor, and this is usually Dr. Brown. And So yeah, so this will prepare you for graduate school, if whether you're applying for a master or a PhD program, or it will also help you on your future career, like a future research career, since you have that experience with like writing manuscript and going through the publication process. And another good thing with choosing the challenger is that we match all of our student authors with like a mentor. So this is typically graduating URH alumni, and it could also be PhD students at UCSD. And these scholars, they are happy, they're like voluntary, and they're happy to help our students. And they provide that mentorship, whether you have questions about applying for PhDs programs, or whether you just want to learn about like what career options in research. So these mentors, they will serve as your mentor, but they also look over your paper and give like a one-on-one guidance in how to like further polish your paper. And so recently we interviewed our volume 3 authors. So the volume that we are currently trying to push this year, to learn more about their experience, and they shared like a lot of inspirational stories, and they stressed the importance of having a mentor. So if you want, you can click on this link. So after this presentation, we will like give everyone access to the PowerPoint. So you can click on this link and like hear from our authors. And let me just for now copy and paste the link to group chat. Okay, and then next slide. So couple announcement that ongoing events that we're currently working on. So one is that the Challenger Research Journal Committee, the board, we are currently recruiting for anyone interested to serve as board members for the year of 2022 and 2023. So we have a couple of positions open, such as submission manager, secretary, publishing coordinator, webmaster. Another ongoing event is that we are opening for volume 4 for next year as well. So if you have interest to submit your manuscript for paper for volume 4, so in the end, we have kind of like a Google form that we will send to everyone, and you can like select whichever event you're interested. So I know that with McNair, you have to write like a research report at the end of the program as one of the deliverable. So you can kind of like twist that if you want, and then submit for volume 4, and then we can start with the publication process. And if you're interested, you can also sign up to be an undergraduate peer reviewer. So Sam, another board member, is currently working on like developing a tutorial to train undergraduates to become like a peer reviewer for the journal. And then lastly, if you want to get notified and have access to volume 3, which is the volume that we are currently publishing this year, you can also check on that checkbox. So I'm going to send the survey link real quick. So this is the Google form. So if you're interested in like any of these, you can just go to this Google form, and there will be one question that asks like, which of the following are you interested in? And then once you check them, we will contact you and send you the relevant information. And next slide. So I guess since we have time, we can like kind of do like a quick tour of our journal, and then we'll see if Windua, if you can screen share.
If she can't, I could do it for you, or you could screen share. Can you do it?
Do you see it?
No. Oh, let me stop screen sharing and see if that. Okay, there you go. Great.
All right. So this is just like if you click on that like WordPress, what it looks like. We just have our logo, Challenger, bit more about ourselves, the URH program, because that are like the 3 criteria. And you can scroll more and you can see like become part of our team. We are recruiting more for our next cycle of members, and like board members, editors, as well as like past publication workshops, so like similar to the current one, and some like extra interviews. Which one, what will be most helpful to all of you will probably be both like our volumes and publishing in it. So if you go to volumes, you can see some of our past volumes, the PDFs to look at them, or the eScholarship ones to go read what was published. Volume 3 is in the process of being published and like finalized, so it will be added soon. And then publish is what's probably going to be most useful for all of you. You can fill out the interest form link, which is the same link that should have been, pretty sure it was updated, if not updated later today. And also just more reminders of the who can apply and how to apply process. Reminder of like, so AEP was what URH used to be called, so do not get confused for like some of those repeats, approvals, and all the different things that you need to publish. This is for the last deadline, but this counter will reset for the new cycle now. And there's other ones you can also explore, like research. These are also papers within, and there's a research guide from a librarian from before that can like help you explore things that you want to, if you haven't picked an advisor and a topic yet, those are places for, and more just about us as well.
And then I'm just gonna do like a quick screen share lastly. So yeah, so let me see. So yeah, so this was the form that I was talking about. So fill in your information and then you can just check multiple events that you're interested in, or if you're interested in receiving like immediate access to your most recent volume. And then if you want also, you can also go to that YouTube link and hear their stories. And then we also ask you to evaluate like today's overall workshop, and we're constantly looking for feedback. So like not only our part, but with like Dr. Brown and Allegra's part, you can also add in your feedbacks here and then we'll deliver it to them. So yeah, so this is just like in the description, we just post a lot of like different links, but I think what's most kind of like one of the more helpful item is the eScholarship webpage. So these two are just like the first year 2019 initial interview with the co-founders, which is basically me and Leslie, and the initial authors, if you want to read about them. They also published on eScholarship, and this was the paper from last year, volume 2. And we can kind of go back to like the very first paper that we published in 2019. And so this is the total hit and this is the total downloads. And as you see, like they are still like in the year of 2022, April, they're still being read and downloaded by several people. It just means that having your paper published on like an open access platform, or in this case, eScholarship, means that it will constantly being read. Constantly being read by others. And so like if people do like research that's relevant to their field, they will just need to like type the keyword and then it might direct them to your paper. And that's how one way you're making direct contribution to their research and also to whatever type of research you want to push for. So yeah, so I think that kind of concludes the challenger portion. And lastly, we will pass back to Allegra for like Q&A session.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions? I just wanted to build on what Belinda was just mentioning about that kind of visibility. So like I mentioned, Google and Google Scholar crawl the entire PDF. So it's OCR, it can find that content with through just keyword searches. But one of the another thing that you can do to kind of heighten that visibility is link to it. So one of the authors I saw, she linked to her paper in eScholarship on her LinkedIn page. You can create an ORCID, which is free to everyone. That's that researcher ID that's really important to have and really useful. And I actually have a guide on how to populate it and how to make it more robust and less work. So wherever you can link to these papers, that bumps you up in these kind of what's called relevancy rankings and in the search flow. It doesn't look like there's any other questions.
Any questions? Going once, going twice. Let's see. Looks like we don't have any questions.
Oh, I put a
think
question in
there's
the
a-
chat.
Okay. So Brianna's asking, do non-open access publication platforms feel less inclined to publish research that has already been published via open access public platforms? So that's the thing, is that you can't really, publish in one journal and then publish in another journal, but you can, and this is increasing. It used to be not a thing, but preprint servers are gaining traction across disciplines. So physics was the first one with arXiv, which was, I guess, like in the 1990s, I think it was, it started. And because of this proliferation of preprint, so that's the version of your manuscript that you submit to a journal. And physics people were just like, their science was going so fast that they couldn't wait. It sometimes takes a year for it to get into the final journal. So they were putting it up on a preprint server so that they could get their science out there and people could read it and interact with it. And increasingly, other disciplines and other journals are taking up these kind of preprint repositories. Like I can help you find a preprint repository in just about like any discipline. And then in addition, you because of the UC OA policies, you can put your, and this is the conversation that Dr. Brown and I are having, you can put your postprint, so your the version of your manuscript that the journal accepts for publication. This is after peer review, this is after all the edits are incorporated, but then it's before the publisher puts on their, their formatting and makes it look pretty and puts it up on their website. So it's that version right before. You retain your copyright, you're totally entitled to putting that in the eScholarship, the open access repository. So that's where you just ensure you get the most kind of reach for your research. I mean, it's a good idea to check the policies, but while you're at the UC, you're covered by the UC OA policies. And I can definitely walk you through to how to kind of find that out and recognize where you can put your preprint or your postprint up. And not be in conflict with the journal. But there's definitely, you can't publish in two different journals the same article. And there was a question about like dissertations, does that, but there's been studies done where most journals do not consider a dissertation a prior publication because there's so much work that has to be done to make it into an article or a book, or that's not really a one-to-one. Does that answer your question? Okay, and Roman's asking about the guide for ORCID. I'll pop that in the chat. Yeah. Let me find it. And all the research guides that we're talking about, through the library, they're open access. So like the easiest way for me to find my stuff is I type in UCSD library ORCID and my guide pops up. And again, my contact information is on the guide. So you can, if you have any questions or need any help with any of this, please let me know.
All right, are there any other questions? Looks like there are no other questions, so I think we can conclude this session. Thank you very much, Allegra, and to the Challenger team for helping out with this session.
Thank you for having us.
Quite welcome. All right. Take care, everyone.